Fabulous. Fabulous. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here this afternoon, sharing your time with us. We are the Great Plains chapter of the ACMP. I think if you have found us, you know that we are one of the few multi-state chapters in the entire organization. So we cover North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, and Missouri, because this area tends to have a little bit less population and therefore a smaller voice. So we said, no, we are going to give change management the voice it deserves in this area. So I see people from kind of all over the place. So that's wonderful. And my name is Beth Minton. I'm the president. I've been the president for, oh gosh, a couple, 3 years now. I have to think about it. I'll ask Erin. She's my detail person. She'd be able to tell me when I joined. But as president, I serve with an amazing board who works really hard to serve you and this organization. So shout out to Tony Burke, our vice president, who'll be joining us here in a little bit. Erin Aliano, our secretary, who holds all of it together so beautifully. Krishna Clay just joined us as our treasurer. We've got Kate Phillips, who's here in the audience as our comms director. Crystal Algie as our Director of Area Representatives, and Michelle LaRue, who is hosting this wonderful event, is our Membership Director. So we don't do it alone. We do it together, and we do it for you and for the wonderful profession of change management. So thank you again all for being here. Michelle, I will turn it over to you to get us started.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Beth. And again, welcome to everybody. And as she said, I'm the Director of Membership. So over the past, I think it is at least 2 years, probably closer to 3, we've been trying to gather everybody we can find in the Great Plains 5 states and bring them into the fold and work out what we can provide of value to you. And we've offered some virtual sessions, some in-person sessions, and very excited to host this session for you today. We'll be doing in-person sessions in the fall, and please feel free to reach out to me anytime with any recommendations, suggestions for speakers, topics, venues. We've also had reach outs from others in PMI and not affiliated, but peripheral organizations. So we're expanding and growing, and it's great to have you all on the line here today and involved. So we've got Tamara Sutton, and she is the Vice President of Product Experience and Operations at DMSi Software. And she's going to talk us through her world of UI UX and share what she does and her lessons and her insights with the perspective of change management too, and what we can learn and what we can adopt to ultimately accelerate adoption and in the programs that we're working on too. So the format is really that she'll do a presentation. Feel free to put your questions in the chat as we go, and we will have a discussion afterwards. So over to you, Tamara.
Okay, well, thanks, Michelle, and thanks for having me and inviting me to be here today, and welcome everyone. Thanks for being here. Like Michelle said, my name is Tamara Sutton. I'm the Vice President of Product Experience and Operations at DMSi. I've been in the UX space a little over 10 years, and before that I was in software development. I do want to start with a bit of a confession. I'm not a change management expert, but I am a UX design practitioner and leader. And over the years, I've noticed that the way my team thinks about problems, the questions that we ask, and the processes that we follow seems to be useful beyond product design. So today, I'm going to share some of that with you, not as a prescription, but more as a perspective and a way of thinking that might be useful the next time you're leading people through something new. Okay, so a few things I've learned from my time as a UX designer and leader of a design team is, first, the best solutions don't come from the smartest person in the room. So they come more from a deep understanding of the people that we're designing for. Second is to check your assumptions at the door. I always tell my team, you're there to learn, not to confirm. You need to check any biases that you have before you go and talk to users. When we're talking to users, we want to learn from their perspective and their experiences so that we don't lead with what we think we already know or assume that we already understand their needs or their motivations. And third, resistance is feedback, and feedback is a gift. It's not a problem to overcome. So it tells you exactly where the gap is between maybe what you designed and what people need. So we want to make sure that we get curious about that. And none of these are unique to design ideas, but design has built concrete practices around all of these things. And that's really what I'm going to share here today. So first, what is the UX design process? Surprisingly, even as popular as the field has grown, I continue to find that it's often filled with misconceptions of the true value and work that a UX designer does. One of the biggest misconceptions is that a designer's primary responsibility is to make something look pretty. Because honestly, that's one of the last things that we do, and sometimes we don't even have to do it at all. So if you search for the UX design process online, you'll probably get various frameworks outlining anywhere from 5 to 8 different steps. Today, I'm going to focus on the 6 that I think are the most relevant to our conversation. And what makes this process distinctive isn't necessarily any individual step, but it's the sequencing of steps and the discipline of not jumping ahead. So we don't start with solutions. We don't open a design tool until we've spent real time understanding the problem to solve and the people that are affected by it. We don't finalize a design until we've tested it with real people. And we don't declare success just when we launch. We want to measure whether people actually adopted what we built. So that's the sequencing thing. And sometimes, or something important to note, is that at any given step in this process, you may learn something that sets you back to a previous one or 2 or 3 steps. So let's start by taking a look at the first one. The first thing my team does before any research or design is to understand the actual problem to solve. So, not the solution that somebody already has in mind, but the real problem. So, before any design work begins, we ask, what is the actual problem? Why does it matter? How are people solving this today? What would happen if we didn't solve this problem? And then we interview stakeholders and subject matter experts, not to validate ideas that we already have, but to learn what we don't know. So we know what we need to go and learn, and we let that guide our research with actual users. We also want to make sure that we align on what success looks like for the people experiencing this, not just for the project team. One of the reasons we do this is often users will come to us with solutions that they've already formed. So they will describe what they want in terms of something that they already know. So I like this quote. It's attributed to Henry Ford. I'm not sure if he actually said it, but it frames it nicely. And he said, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. So the underlying need or problem to solve was to get somewhere faster. And a car solved that problem. And so we see this consistently. Somebody asked for faster horses, but the underlying need is transportation. Or maybe somebody asked for more training, and the underlying need is to make something easier to use. Our job in this understand phase is to really dig past that initial stated request and identify what the real problem to solve is. I want to share a couple of frameworks that help us structure what we know and surface what we still need to find out in this understand phase. The 5 W's and H is something that you might recognize. It's used in journalism and project management, but in UX, we use it as a problem facing tool or a problem framing tool. Before we talk to users, we fill in what we know for each question, or more importantly, we identify areas that we can't answer those questions confidently or we just don't know. And those gaps become research questions that we take into our user interviews. Another one is the jobs to be done framework from the product world. It's for understanding what someone really is trying to accomplish aside from whatever solution you might be considering. The idea is that people don't buy products or adopt processes, they quote unquote hire them to get a job done. And the question isn't what does this feature do? It's what is somebody trying to accomplish and does this help them do it? There's a quote that says, people don't want to buy a quarter-inch drill, they want a quarter-inch hole. So nobody wakes up wanting a drill, they want something hung on their wall. The drill is just the means. And jobs to be done helps keep your focus on the actual goal, not the necessarily the tool or solution being requested. So if you use a formula of when I want to, so I can, this kind of forces you to articulate that context, the goal, and the benefit from the person's perspective and not the organization's perspective. So in the home example, when I'm decorating my home, I want to make a hole in the wall so that I can hang something. Nobody ever really needed a drill, they needed a hole. And actually, honestly, they didn't even need a hole, they just needed something on the wall. So the second example listed here might be a little bit closer to what many of you work on when a process changes. I want to understand why so I can explain it to my team with confidence. Notice it's not something that's like, I want to attend the training or I want to read the communication. The job is confidence and credibility with their team. If you what you design for that doesn't give them that, the training, the email, or whatever it is, then it hasn't done the job. And that's what this framework really surfaces. It keeps every decision like really grounded in what people are actually trying to get done. And both of these things are something that you can do before any research with your team, and they just help shape the questions that you bring into those research sessions when you're talking to end users or the people that are being affected. And so, now that we've framed the problem in our understand phase and identified the areas that we need to learn from our users, we go and verify it and learn from the people that are actually experiencing it. This is where some teams might skip ahead. So they assume, okay, the problem I identified is the right one, and they might just start designing solutions. But first, we want to verify, is the problem that we framed actually the problem that users experience? Sometimes we get it right, and sometimes we discover that the real problem is something adjacent, or sometimes it's something that we didn't see at all. So second, we want to learn from what people do today. So not what a process documentation says that they do, but what they actually do. So how are they navigating this problem today? What are their workarounds? And what does their real workflow look like? Next, we want to understand how they feel about it. So what are their emotions and motivations that shape their behavior just as much as maybe a process does? So what's frustrating to them? What are they worried about? What do they actually want? And what are their expectations on how something should work? And even what's shaping their expectations? A lot of times in the software industry, that someone's expectations to how something might work might be from another software tool that they use. So fourth, we choose the right research method for what we're trying to learn. So there's qualitative research, which is interviews, observations, contextual inquiries, which is kind of a mix of an interview and an observation. And that tells us the why behind what users are doing. It's really rich and it's specific, but it's from a smaller group. So for qualitative research, I like to start with interviewing 4 or 5 users. And if the themes that emerge from those interviews are very similar, it's probably enough. But if we're hearing vastly different things from this user group, we may want to add more users to the study. we want to make sure that we feel we have a good perspective for our users and the different segments that they might be in. So another method that we pair often with qualitative research is quantitative research. And that's things such as surveys and analytics. So these tell us how many, how much it scales, but it tells you just what's happening and not the why. That's why both are important, because the gap between what people say and what they actually do is real, and it shows up in almost every research study that we run. So a lot of times I like to pair the two together. I might look at quantitative research in that understand phase and let that help frame what I'm seeing that people are doing, ask questions, and then go validate it again with more quantitative research. And after we do the research, we want to synthesize and turn that raw data into artifacts that create a shared understanding across the team. So this is where we go into the synthesis phase. I want to share a few artifacts that I find helpful to pull this information together that we often use. I'd say almost every time there is an affinity map made. So that's the first one I'm going to share. After we've done our research, our interviews, observation, whatever methods that we use, we write down what we heard and observed on sticky notes and start grouping them together by theme. So these patterns start to emerge that no one single interview would have revealed on its own, but it's how we are able to go from a pile of raw data to a handful of meaningful insights. And this is also another great activity to do with a team. Even if you're a remote team, there are online whiteboards such as Mural and Miro that make this really easy. And we often use that as a starting point for our notes from our interview sessions that we have. Another useful tool is an empathy map. And so you might have seen one of these before. The one that I'm showing up here is a really popular one. If you just Google empathy map online, this one pops up quite a bit. It's really understanding, what does this person think, feel, say, and do. So it's a really simple framework, but filling it in forces the team to articulate what they actually know about the people they're affecting versus what they assume. So it's built around those central questions of who are we designing for and what is their experience. And filling this together as a team based on research and not assumption helps make the person or users feel a little bit more real to everyone in the room, even including those that might not have been in the research sessions. And the last artifact I want to share for synthesizing information is a journey map. And this might be one of the most powerful of the three for anyone leading people through change. It's a timeline of the user's experience as they go through different stages of their journey. So where are the moments of clarity or confusion? Is there friction or frustration? Sometimes there's excitement and like they feel very confident in what they're doing. The emotion line running through it is the part I would draw your attention to, because it shows where the experience goes up and it shows where the experience dips. So those moments of friction or confusion or anxiety. And when we map that, we can, change the conversation about where to invest in design changes or extra support and communication. So you may have seen journey maps used for customer experience. We use them a lot in service design, but the same tool works for mapping any human experience through a transition. I think these work really well and help tell the story really well too. So the last thing we do when we're in this synthesized phase before we move into designing anything is we want to define the outcome. So we describe what success looks like for the user. It's not what we're going to ship, but it's what will be better for them. So that sentence kind of becomes your North Star for every design decision that we make. And importantly, it becomes what we measure as success after we launch. So this is different from defining requirements or writing feature specs. Um, I don't know if any of you know Jared Spool, but he is a UX industry leader, and he frames it this way: if we do a fantastic job, how will we improve someone's life? So we use this formula that says, like, we'll know this worked when this specific group can do something without this friction or needing support. And it kind of forces you to be a little bit more specific about who, what, and what good looks like. So I have a couple of examples here, like a warehouse staff can complete a task in under 4 minutes. Managers can run their own reports, and new users completing their first task without training. So these are all things that are observable or measurable. So you can watch them happen or not happen. And that's the point. We want to know how we're going to measure if what we did was successful. So these success outcomes, they become what we're going to test it against in prototyping and what you measure after launch. And it's what connects our synthesis directly to measurement. And that's why it lives here at the end of the synthesize phase before we start designing anything. So now that we have an understanding of the people that we're designing for, their needs, their pain points, their mental models, then we can actually start designing. But what's a little bit different about how my team approaches this is we don't usually design the final solution first. We typically design the bare minimum needed to test the idea. So that might be sketches on paper or a rough wireframe, a simple workflow that's drawn out on a whiteboard. The fidelity doesn't always matter at this stage, but what matters is having something that's concrete enough to put in front of a person and learn from their reaction. So we want to get a reaction from them. We also don't do this alone. We bring in stakeholders or subject matter experts and sometimes users even into this very early design session. So we'll sketch together, even if it's just for a couple of hours. Sketching can help surface ideas and considerations that no one person would have reached independently. When you share a sketched idea, people start building on it, and you actually can come up with something that no one person brought into the session, but it was a collaboration. And so the output of this phase isn't a finished design, it's more of a hypothesis and something that says, based on what we learned, we think this is the right solution. Now let's go find out. And so that's what takes us into the testing phase. And I'd say one of the most valuable things that the design discipline has taught me is to test before committing. So in design, we call this prototyping or usability testing, but the idea is really simple. It's like you want to build the cheapest version of your idea that you can put in front of a real person. You watch them interact with it, and you learn what's working and what isn't before you invest in building or developing the whole thing. And I have to say, this is a very humbling experience because you'll have spent a lot of time thinking you understood exactly what you needed to do, and you design something, and then you watch a user just not be able to complete their task or use that design that's put in front of them. I'd say, like, when you're doing a usability test, one of the rules that we have is that you don't help a user. So you give a user a task and they try to navigate whatever prototype that you put in front of them. And when somebody gets stuck, you need to resist the urge to help guide them because their struggle is the data. And if you help, you lose the signal of the path that the user would have taken. So you want to watch and see how they explore the system because that's data that you can take back to your design. I think in terms of change management, the underlying principle is like transferable. Before you roll something out broadly, you likely would find a low stakes way to test it. So you might run it with one team, or walk people through a new process in a workshop, maybe sharing a communication draft with a handful of people that are affected and ask them what questions it raises. The goal here is really just to find out what's wrong before it's expensive to fix, because the alternative is discovering those problems at full scale when fixing them is much harder and the cost is much higher. The last phase is one that often can get skipped, but it's really important because it's measuring after you released what you designed. So in product development, there's a very natural tendency to measure just whether something shipped. Did we hit the date? Did we close the tickets? Did we deliver training? Now, those things matter, but they're outputs. And they tell you more what you produced, but they don't tell you whether anything changed. So in design, we call this the difference between outputs and outcomes. An output is something that you made. An outcome is the improvement in someone's experience or behavior that resulted in it. So the left column here is the question that a lot of teams might ask. These are outputs. They tell you whether you shipped. The right column is the question we ask. The outcomes, they tell you whether or not anything actually changed for people. So back on the synthesized slide, we talked about defining what success looks like for the person before you design anything. This is where that pays off. When you've defined a human outcome up front, users can complete this task in under 3 minutes without help. You have something meaningful to measure after launch. Not just did we ship, but did anything actually change? So I guess I would want to close the content portion with these three concrete things. You know, I find it's really useful if you leave something specific that you can try. First would be to talk to people before you plan. You know, interview 3, 4, 5 people who will be affected. Ask how they work today, what worries them, and what a good outcome would look like for them. Not to validate decisions that you've already made, but to genuinely learn and let that shape the approach that you take. Second would be to map the experience, you know, not just the project. Your project plan shows milestones, but what it doesn't show is what someone goes through during this change, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what they're worried about. Take an hour or so and just draw that out, because it changes the conversation about what support is actually needed. And then third is writing your outcomes before you start. What will be observably different for real people when this works? So, you know, just completing that sentence of, we'll know this worked when a specific group can do something without needing help or workarounds. So, and you kind of just post that and use that as your North Star for decisions that you make along the way. Now, none of these desire or require a design team, but they do require a decision to understand people before solving for them. And, you know, I'll just add that, you know, my team approaches almost every problem the same way. We try to understand before we assume, we research before we decide, synthesizing what we learn so that the whole team can see what we see, and test before we commit to a direction. And we always want to measure after we launch. So again, kind of going back to that, it's not just about what we shipped, but it's what changed for the people that we designed for. And so, you know, this discipline, it doesn't always feel efficient. You know, there's always a lot of pressures to skip ahead, to move faster, to just build the thing. But the work we've done with that discipline constantly produces better outcomes than when we've skipped it. So, you know, I don't know how exactly design thinking can help with change management because I don't know enough about that field. But what I do know is that these habits of understanding people before solving for them, testing before committing, or measuring outcomes seem to be really useful beyond product design. So that's what I prepared for you today. Let me know what questions you have.
Well, first, I'd like to offer a round of applause. Thank you so much for that, Tamara. That was really had all my attention. I was like, ooh.
Yes, amazing. Yes. And so efficient in the time as well. That was a lot and so well presented. Thank you so much.
Mhm.